Good morning, and apologies for the scruffy clothing. I've just been out on my bike, and while I was out cycling, I had these thoughts about doing a video. So here I am doing the video. The title of the video is Zen and Photography. I'll explain more. And in the description of this video, I think I've got something like that, why buying a new gear will... I might have said will make you a better photographer. I shouldn't have said that. I should have said will make you produce better photographs. Let me explain. Which is going to be a bit controversial, because so many people out there say gear doesn't matter. You can use a 10-year-old camera and still take great photos. But the point is that a better camera, a newer camera, something different, will, for reasons I'll explain, make you produce better photos. Let's get into it. First of all, a little bit of my history. If you've watched my videos before, you might want to skip this bit. But and by the way, if you haven't watched my videos before, why not? And by all means, of course, subscribe and click the bell and all that sort of stuff. I started photography. Well, I got a camera for my 12th birthday, but I can't say I became a photographer. I did borrow my dad's camera for years and years and years, because he was quite a keen photographer. But I think I really got into it probably late 80s. I became a parent at that point, good for photographing kids, going out for days and that sort of thing. And that's really when it started, I think. The photo behind this one here, this was the sort of thing that I did back then. So I was on holiday with the kids, mid-90s I think, south coast of England, August, and I spent a couple of days, when I could, going off and finding somewhere to get some great photos. And I found a place where I reckoned the sun would rise in the right place. I'd have a nice sort of a view while the sun was rising. So I was up at 4 o'clock, I think, something like that. Half an hour walk, tripod, camera, so on and so forth. And of course we are back in the days of film, manual focus, manual exposure and everything else. Set my tripod up, pitch dark, waited, slowly it got light. It wasn't sunrise, it was way before sunrise, probably half an hour before sunrise. And I got this shot. And it's one of my favourite shots ever. I had it printed at the time and it's still hanging in my house. That's the sort of photography I used to do, and I really enjoyed doing it. And then we got digital cameras came along. I got my first digital camera, which I haven't got, 2002, 3 I think. I got my last film camera in 2002, Nikon, and I got my first DSLR, I think it was 2008, was it a Nikon D90, something like that. And I don't know, there was something about digital that took away some of the enjoyment I had of film photography. And then a few years after that, I started doing weddings in 2013, 2014, pretty well full-time professional, and I've done nearly 300 weddings since then. And I don't often, very rarely in fact, grab one of my wedding cameras and go out and do photography for me. I just, not that I don't have the time, I just don't have the enthusiasm. So pictures like that are history, sadly. And part of it, and this is where the Zen thing comes in, part of it is the experience of actually taking the photograph, the effort and what you put of yourself into the photo. You know, Sony A7 IV, I've got three buttons set up for autofocus, G Master Prime 1.4 prime lenses. You just point at something, focus, click, you're done. And you know, 999 out of 1,000 are going to be perfect photos. From a technical point of view, maybe not from a creative point of view, but from a technical point of view. So there's no longer a requirement from even my D700 Nikon doesn't really require you to do too much in the way of putting yourself into the photograph, of working to get the photograph. Then, slightly changing the subject, if you watch my channel, I probably started, I think, in COVID, probably 2020, maybe before that, I can't remember. But at some point I mentioned, probably in 2 or 3 videos, about wanting a Leica. For a couple of years before that, I'd had this idea that one day I would get a Leica, and talking an M series. I'm not sure why, logically. They just seem to be cameras that world-class photographers use to create beautiful photos. There must be a reason for it. There must be something to it. And obviously the actual photos themselves, absolutely gorgeous and wonderful. And the whole point of this video is that a month ago, 4 weeks, I got, well, not this camera, but I got a Leica M. And I want to tell you a little bit about how that has affected me. Other than reducing my bank balance somewhat. I did lots of research and I got an M9. M9 was the first Leica full frame digital camera, came out in 2009, 18 megapixels. It was a Kodak CCD sensor. And it produced gorgeous photos. The colours were absolutely wonderful, but the sensor, sadly, suffered from corrosion. And been a big problem. Leica did some replacements free of charge for a certain period, and then you had to pay for them. So the M9, and they stopped making them in 2012, I think it was. But there's still some very good, nice M9s out there, obviously second hand. So I got one of these, and it had the sensor, not the sensor replaced, they actually just replaced the glass. It's still this Kodak CCD sensor, I believe. Anyway, this one still had it in there. Got the camera. Bit disappointed. It was a bit more beaten up than it looked in the photos. And long story short, after 5 days, I think it was, I sent it back because it was freezing after every shot. Take a shot, and then you have to pop the bottom plate off, take the battery out, pop the battery in, put the bottom plate back on, take another shot, freezes. So obviously had a problem, sent it back. Looked for another M9, found another one where the seller said absolutely no problem with sensor corrosion. It's the original sensor, but there's no problem with it at all. Brought that one, arrived here, put lens on, stopped down to f16, took some shots of plain white, and there is about 7 or 8 small to quite large spots. Cleaned the sensor, made sure the lens was clean, put it back on, checked it all again, exactly the same. Corrosion. So, sent that one back and decided that no longer was I going to keep playing around with an M9. I would come up to date and get an M10. So, 5 days ago, this guy arrived. An M10 in absolutely gorgeous condition, no marks on it whatsoever. No idea how many shots it's done, because on the M10 they stopped the camera being able to tell you how many shots it's got, so I don't know, but it's, as I say, in very good condition. Got a 35 and a 50mm 1.4 Summilux lenses for it. And the point of this video is, what has this done for me and my photography? I'm not talking about wedding photography, although I will use it for a few shots at a wedding. It's not going to play a big part. But what has it done for my photography? And let's have a look at what I've done in probably the last 2 weeks. And bear in mind, this is April in the UK. We've had absolutely completely rubbish weather. It's been disastrous. I've been out on my bike, as I say. It's about 8 degrees, windy. The sun was out for some of the time, and that's the best day we've had for a couple of weeks. It's been really, really nasty. So not been very inspiring to go out and do much in the way of photography. But the thing about this camera, there's two things about this camera. It's It's different. You've watched my videos. You know that I'm a bit of a gear freak. I've had Nikon. In 2020, I think, I got this Sony A7 III and played around with that because I didn't like the Nikon Z6. I then got the Nikon D780 and a Z5. I then got a Z6 II. And then last year I got the Z8. And they're all the same. They're not literally all the same. But they have the same feel. They do what they're supposed to do very well, but really after the initial sort of 2 or 3 days of, oh, this is a lovely Nikon Z8, but I don't need 120 frames a second. I don't need this. I don't need that. I don't need pre-capture. I'm not going to use this. I'm not going. It's just another camera. It becomes nothing particularly special. It might have better autofocus than the Z6 II. But I managed to photograph, I don't know, 40, 50 weddings with the Z6 II. So it's kind of, so what? This, well, so far, okay, it's a novelty value. As I say, I started 4 weeks ago with the M9. So I've taken quite a few shots with a Leica. But I don't think, certainly at the moment, this does not feel anything like my normal cameras. It is a totally different piece of equipment. Yes, it's still a camera, but it is so different that it doesn't fall into the same bracket that those things do. And for me, maybe not for other people, but for me, this has taken me back to when I had the inspiration, the desire and the passion to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, walk for half an hour and take a photograph that I still love to this day. That is what this camera has done for me. And I suppose my question is, why? Why would that do that? What's so different about it that makes me want to go out and take photos? 2 aspects. One, the actual photos, which have got everyone says it's got a film-like quality. Well, I'm not quite sure what that is supposed to be, because so many of my film photographs came out really dark, really bright, out of focus. So it doesn't look like those. But I kind of understand. It's got that, the colours. The colours are vibrant, rich, deep. Whereas the photos, certainly from the Sonys, and probably even from the Nikon as well, they're a bit harsh. They've got lots of colour, lots of sharpness, lots of contrast. But if you had to describe it now with one word compared to this, I would say they are harsh photos. The photos from the Leica are more, I don't know, more elegant, more refined. They've still got all the detail, all the sharpness, but they've just got this. They've got this look. So there's that side. There's the actual photos, and then of course there's the actual experience of using this. You have no choice but to become involved in taking the photo. You can't point this and click. Actually, you can. I'll come on to that in a second. But most of the time, you would want to, first of all, focus. You've got to manually focus. And that, actually, I was concerned that was going to be fairly difficult, being manual focus, and not something I've done for 20 years odd. It's actually a bit of a doddle. It seems to be very forgiving, unlike DSLRs, or mirrorless rather, about focusing. This seems very forgiving. You can actually focus, click, and unless you're really close to something at 1.4, it just looks like it's in focus. It just works. So there's that. You've then got to, you don't see through the lens, you see through the rangefinder, viewfinder here, and it is a different experience. I didn't realise how how much of an effect it would have on the actual taking of a photograph. It really does create a completely different experience to using mirrorless or even a DSLR with an optical viewfinder. There's then the lens, where obviously you've got focus on it, but you've also got, you know, an aperture ring. Oh, brilliant. And actually that's one of the reasons I moved to Sony, because the G Master lenses have got an aperture ring. Just gets you a little bit more involved than twiddling a button. It's just different. You don't know what the exposure is. It hasn't even really got an exposure meter, which, going back to my film cameras, they had a little needle that told you what the exposure was. This hasn't even got that. If you set everything to auto, it does a very good job of getting the right exposure. But if you do want to go manual, you have no way of knowing what the exposure is, other than it's got a little arrow that points one way for more exposure or that way for less. I think I've got that round the right way. But it's not even as good as a needle that sort of, you know roughly where you are, whether you're over or underexposed. So it's very, very basic. The buttons are what they are. You can't program the buttons to do anything else. The menu on here is 1.5 screens. Yeah, 1.5 screens. Compared to my Sony, which has got about 35 screens of stuff in the menu. So it's very unprogrammable. It is what it is, and you have to learn, and I'm still learning a long way. I've got a long way to go. You've got to learn how to use this, and that's one of the things which is so charming about it. It's getting a good photo becomes a bit of a challenge again. And that makes photography much more interesting for me, I believe. So that's kind of where the Zen thing comes in, that you need to get familiar with this thing. And I reckon that's probably going to take me another 6 months of almost daily use, so that it kind of becomes part of me. And it just feels so lovely. It really, really does. Even though, as you can see, there is no concession to any sort of ergonomics whatsoever, other than the shutter buttons in a reasonably good place, and on the M10 as opposed to the M9 and the M240, I don't think. I've got this tiny little bump on the back with a rear dial, which the other cameras didn't have. And that's it. That's the only concession towards ergonomics. It is an engineered lump of scientific equipment, and it is just gorgeous. So, what's the point of this video? Well, as I said at the beginning, I see lots of people say, oh, gear won't make you a better photographer. Well, as I say, I disagree. Gear can, first of all, inspire you. It can actually allow you to take better photos. And it can rekindle a passion and an enthusiasm, which that has done for me. At the moment, the photos I'm taking certainly aren't world class. But as I get used to this, and as I get hopefully a bit better weather, and can go out and do some travelling to some more interesting places to get some better pictures, I'll share some of those with you in future. Thank you for watching. Cheers for now.